Today on the podcast, we decided to have a little informal discussion and take two sides of an argument. So Caleb is going to convince me to get an MBA, and I'm going to convince him that MBAs are all trash.
Let's do it. So the first, I have 4 points that I want to bring up. The first one is degrees like MBAs and CPA, CFP, all that. It at least gives a baseline competency verification. So when someone's looking for someone to do their taxes, someone to help them with finances, someone to start a business or do business with, seeing the degrees tells them that at least uh, they have met a minimum threshold of knowledge and they have gotten a certain amount of knowledge um, because they have gone through the program or the course or classes or whatever that has forced them to, and they've taken an exam or a test, whatever the completion requirement is, uh, that gives the person looking like more verification about their knowledge.
Yes, I would agree with that. I think that all credentials confer some amount of baseline understanding. I would say I don't know if MBA programs are how similar they are to like an undergraduate degree, but I do know those can vary significantly from institution to institution. So, like the online MBAs versus the MBAs in person. Uh, all that just to say, I'm not entirely sure that the baseline is standardized. Uh, but I'll accept that. It proves a baseline competency. I think that's reasonable.
I would say that another point is it provides a legal protection in certain ways. So, well, I would say legal protection for a client, customer, whatever, not necessarily the person, because the person who has a degree, because the person who has a degree has more compliance, not less. But a lot of industries require credentials for accountability. So, and you have to do continuing education, all of that. So it actually carries some weight. Um, it means that, like, for the client, the person who has the degree or has the credentials is personally liable if they do something that is intentionally uh, wrong, I guess. And so I think that that is an important way to have more legal protection as someone who has a degree, because you can tell people like, hey, this, for example, in as a financial advisor, like there's a fiduciary responsibility. So you can tell people that you have that responsibility, um, and give them a little bit, you know, more reason to trust you, and things are actually enforceable. So not only does it give you more weight, but it allows the client to have recourse if something were to happen.
I think the financial advisor example is a good one. Other than what comes to mind is I have a fiduciary responsibility, except, oh, wait, you can't buy the index. You can only buy a mutual fund that my company supplies that has a higher expense than if you went out and bought Vanguard. So is it really fiduciary? Are you really thinking about the best interest of the client? I'm not entirely sure that's the case. Uh, the I think the need for credentials in a system, uh, I would actually say is a weakness, and part of the reason that I think MBAs are bad, not bad in all situations, but why they have been overutilized, and that has to do with uh, people covering their butts. So if you're I don't know, a hiring agent or HR or whatever, and you hire Joe Schmo off the street without an MBA, uh, you're likely to get fired or highly penalized if it goes badly. But if you can say, well, he had all the credentials, then you're safe. Like you looked at the paper and on paper it looked great, uh, which tells you nothing about the real quality of the person or their ability to make money or be creative in marketing or whatever their position is. It just is a box that is checked that says like, well, I went the safe route. It's like if you're the secretary and you schedule the plane via some large airline and the flight is a nightmare versus if you schedule it with a small airline, uh, schedule it with the big one and the CEO has a terrible time and you're like, well, I picked the safe option. So, I did my due diligence, but you picked the small one and it's a nightmare and you're fired.
Yeah. My question would be, do you think, at least for the professional degrees, do you think someone could fake their way through an entire course or like class for CFP, CPA, MBA, and then not actually learn anything? And so that when they got into business itself, they couldn't actually perform? Like, would the credentials, do you think there's a situation in which they could get the credentials without actually learning anything? And so then that argument would, or that scenario would happen where you hire them because they have the credentials, but they don't actually know any of the stuff that the credentials require.
Well, especially MBA, when I think of MBA, I think of like this person is the whole point of the MBA is to get them to be good at decision making. Is that like when you think of an MBA credentialed person, what are the main qualities that stick out to you?
I would say they have learned more about strategy and they have more knowledge about the industry. That would be my, so like if someone
Wouldn't that
got a
be more of
market,
a consultant though? If your point was to just know about things and advise, that sounds more like a consulting position.
um, so then what's your positioning?
When I think of MBA, I think of management, something on a management
Oh, okay.
track. Is that
Yeah.
an inaccurate understanding of the MBA?
No, I don't think that's inaccurate.
So managers to me are like they're a pyramid of decision-making machines until you get to the CEO who is his whole job is just making series of decisions. And the problem with an MBA and almost every degree is that the it is incredibly difficult to set up an educational system that facilitates decision making as opposed to um, like a scientific rigor, like everybody wants to be physics, where there's a single right answer. And well, okay, that's almost always true. Um, where there's a mathematical answer and this is correct and this is not, but that really doesn't train you to be a decision maker. So you could have CFP or an MBA or whatever because you went through a system. I, I tend to doubt the quality of online MBA programs. They could be excellent. I don't really know, but to me, it seems like another step of the like, did you like have to go out and make a business and make a bunch of decisions and uh, learn from it? Or did you just have to do some assignments and write some papers and we called it good? Uh, so that's where I get into the like, you could totally have the degree and be trash at managing people.
I would say if MBAs are close to undergrad in terms of how it's structured, I could see that being the case because there's a lot of undergrads who literally know nothing because all they did was basically fake their way through the entire thing. So that is fair.
Yeah,
Um,
in hindsight, maybe I should have reached out to my friend who has an MBA and asked him questions.
yeah. The third point that I think goes for certifications and degrees is the fact that there becomes a shared language and framework. So people who have taken those certifications and those degrees have similar mental models because they're learning from similar structures, and then they have the same vocabulary because that's what they're learning. And so then it makes working in complex and high stakes environments not necessarily easier uh functionally, or I guess not necessarily easier like with the actual task itself, but easier because the people working together have a similar understanding of what they're talking about and the model in which they're gonna work from. And it also allows you to communicate some of that vocabulary to people who don't know as much because you've learned it in the first place.
So general communication improvement to peers. Yes, I would agree that that is a function. Like any other function, though, it could have a limiting if the system is cookie cutter. Kind of the last point. If the system's a little cookie cutter, you could limit your thinking to like systems based thinking instead of um, like a more complex problem solving. But yeah, I think having a shared language, having shared understanding is helpful. Um, yes, as long as the system that you learned and the language that you learned is not too rigid. Because if your main job is I'm going to tackle complex scenarios that arise, then I may not have seen exactly, and I need to figure out a good solution. Then by definition, you have to be handling things that are new, and you can't get too dependent on a system for that, I think. I don't know, that could be wrong. Um,
So
mm, go ahead.
one thing that I would ask, like if let's say an engineer was working with another engineer, they don't necessarily like if they're trying to figure out how to make a building work, it doesn't mean that it is a totally new situation where none of the mental models work.
Mhm.
They could use one of the mental models they've learned in order to build the building, but they just have to figure out which mental model to use. In engineer's case, like which calculations actually work. And just practically like, let's say they could choose from three different ways to do calculations and one of them does work that they've learned before. I think it allows for better collaboration because this engineer knows how these calculations work and this engineer does because they've both gone through whatever the higher degree is. I'm not sure exactly what the higher degree is called for engineers.
Right. Uh,
Right.
yeah, you can get it's mostly masters for an engineer. If you're going to go higher, you go into a master's and you specialize more
Okay.
into like a subdomain.
That's how
Um,
I would see it.
yeah, I would say kind of the problem with equating to engineers is that um, if you want to think of in the box thinkers, it's engineers. And the the I mean the example would be my um, there's like a running joke in my engineering program, which was like, you never want to be in management. You want to get promoted up to the point that the next step up is a management, and then you change jobs uh, because it's so far away from like turning the wrench that it's terrible for an engineer. Engineers who are managers are quite rare and expensive, especially if they're good managers. Uh, my advisor was an engineer, and he said his last job he got promoted to be a manager, and his boss called him in and apologized to him and then promoted him. Uh, so the engineers was the thing I was thinking when you said shared language, but it is far more critical, I would say, because everything's so rigid. Like there is a correct and an incorrect, and it's clearly defined. Whereas with an MBA, it's far more nebulous. I think the for the reason you articulated that, I think there's an argument to say that you could replace some versions of an MBA with uh like logic puzzles, or even just here's a scenario, what would you do and why. That's kind of the Google model for hiring. It's like here's a scenario, give us an answer and your explanation of why you gave the answer. And it's more to see the person's thinking process than it is to get to a correct answer. I mean, I think they also do with some of their coding. Here's a question, there is a correct way, but they also just want to see how you think. Uh,
Interestingly enough, I uh, know some people who are getting a CFP, and there will be times on the CFP practice exams where they will purposely give you no right answers, and you have to
mhm,
choose the least wrong one, which
mhm,
is kind of like what you're talking about. It's just like decision making and figuring out how to make the best of in that case,
a
bad situation.
situation. Yeah. I I also tend to think that you could probably get to the same result without having to spend $90,000 to do it
Actually, that brings up the
in
last
two
point
years.
of mine, which is the skin in the game. So the way I would see it from this point of view is because the credential does cost time, money, and effort, seeing that someone has that credential at least shows you that they work hard enough to follow through on some things. Because to get a CFP, to get an MBA, to get a CPA, you have to go through the studying. You have to go most of the time. You have to spend the money and you have to put in the effort in order to actually gain that credential. So you can't just half-heartedly do it most times. I know for the CFP, you definitely can't because of the amount of time that I've seen my friends studying for that, but it would show potential clients in the future or potential business partners like, okay, they really put in the time for this. So I know that there's a way to get them to follow through on some other things if there's the motivation there. What would
So
you
why
say?
don't we just make every undergraduate degree $100,000?
Because undergrads are a stepping stone to professional degrees, and I would definitely argue they're not as valuable as a professional degree. Plus, there are many $40,000 to $60,000 undergrad degrees, which
But if we can make them even more valuable by pushing up the price, why not do it?
I don't think that the price itself is indicative of the value. I think it is the combination of the price, the time that you spend, um, and the effort that you have to put in. Because the CFP, I'm don't quote me on this, but I'm pretty sure it's like maybe $4,000 to $6,000. But you have to spend 3 years worth of time getting experience, and you have to put probably 300 hours worth of studying in yourself. So like the combination of all of that makes it very expensive effort wise. So I would say that it's not necessarily just price. There's like multiple different pieces that go into each professional degree that kind of indicate more of the value.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree that you're going to filter out people who are not committed, but my thesis would be, does it really have to be $90,000 or, what have you? What can it, for a person who has run their own small business, uh, can that be an immediate qualifier for MBA? Or if you've managed several people before, or like, which I think is worked into larger systems now. I don't know that MBAs are as required as they once were. Uh, but yeah, like if you've shown the experience to manage people or you've run a business before, uh, why be so intense on the MBA? Uh, it seems a little bit of a gatekeepy thing. CFP, I get a little bit more in that, um, yeah, you're managing other people's money, or um, actually, CFP, is that the one?
Yeah, it's certified financial professional.
Yeah. Um, so there's a little bit of a regulatory, like, we want to come on you, down on you heavy if you screw something up. But to me, a lot of those things have a sense of gatekeeping in them, which I tend to think is unreasonable. Uh, Especially like if you can't get a management job because you don't have an MBA. Also, I know a lot of people with MBAs that can't get management jobs. So it definitely is not itself a qualifier. Uh, and in fact, the ones that I'm thinking of right now have online MBAs.
That's actually what I was going to ask you is if you yourself believe that the institution can definitely vary like the qualification. So, and the online MBAs and stuff are like way cheaper, then wouldn't that be a little
Hmm.
bit more of an indicator of value if the online institutions are way cheaper, the MBAs nowhere near as high quality, the in-person MBAs are much more expensive, but in general, you've seen that they might be a lot higher quality.
Well, it tells you in historically that these people have produced better MBAs than these people. It doesn't necessarily tell you the quality currently, but that is a rule of thumb, that in the past you're like, well, these people, it's just kind of like the comparison price thing where like people value something that's higher price than lower price. Um, and I'm not saying that there's no value to an MBA. I just don't see the reason to go pay $50,000 for it or whatever. Now, um, if you're getting a free ride, uh, and you don't plan on going into business for yourself, like I think we had a previous discussion about like business degrees in general, where if you're wanting to be in a Fortune 500 or a C-suite, then maybe getting a business degree and MBA is a good idea just as a qualifier to get in the door, because some of those businesses still have that requirement. But if you're going to go work at Google, nah, man, don't worry about it.
You
So
don't
I
think
don't
you
know if
would,
I answered your question or not.
do you not think that you would have a step ahead of most people at Google if you had an MBA? Not from pure knowledge, but from in the eyes of like the management at Google. Would they not
I
see you?
I doubt it. They have so much internal evaluation stuff. Uh, they really want to see past performance. Um, but that is a good question. Like a green person who wants to go into OLS or some sort of management, where do they stick them to get that evaluation? Because you're clearly not going to get it. Like if you haven't worked at all, there's nothing there to get information from. So maybe to get your foot in the door, it might be helpful. But is your foot in the door worth $50,000, or could you have done that a different means that would have taken less than a couple years?
How would you consider, so kind of going off of that a little bit, but if a company pays for someone to get their certification,
Mm,
how does that affect like the dedication versus I'm just doing this? Like how would you see someone who has the entire thing paid for them in
yeah.
terms of quality of their dedication or
Well,
education?
it depends on who's paying for it. Um, like if mommy and daddy are paying for it, then I tend to be like, oh, I don't know if that's going to work out real well. But I mean, just the people do fine, but as a general rule, if your company's paying for it, my guess is the company also values that degree. So it probably is worth it to go ahead and get it if the company is willing to pay for it. That might not always be the case. It might just be like a continuing education. You have to go do something, and it's got to be somewhat vaguely related to whatever your work is. In which case, it could be a waste of your time, but maybe not. Maybe it'd be great. But yeah, if the company's paying for it, I would highly suspect that they've got some sort of a structure that if you have your MBA, you get paid more. In which case, it would be a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean that's how it's working with all my friends who are getting their CFPs. Basically, their companies
Mm,
pay for the whole thing,
yeah.
but it takes a long time. One of my
Hmm.
friends is taking it in March, and uh, he has not hung out with me outside of church in a long, like in a couple months, because he's just so busy studying. And he says every single day after work, he's studies for like 4 hours. So he
Woo!
goes from like 9 to 5, and then stays till 9, basically. It's
Is
crazy.
that you took an exam to get your financial planning? Is that several exams to get a CFP?
Um, it's one huge,
Oh, it's
well,
one.
I mean, I think technically it might be several exams, but they're all part of one big exam.
Mm,
For mine, it's just a specific, like, oh, you can give people investment advice. The CFP allows you to do that, but also says you have experience in handling money in a lot of different ways
mm.
uh, for people who are looking for financial advisors. A
And
CFP,
you have to
yeah.
work under a CPA or something for a while.
Um, well, the CFP and CPA would be different
But there's
companies.
some like you have to work under some sort of financial institution
Yeah, you have to
for a
work
certain amount of
under
time.
a financial advisor for at least 3
Mm.
years, but
Okay,
internships count too, as long as you can show record of you working there and stuff you
gotcha.
did. Yeah, so that's why people can pass the exam and not actually have their CFP for another 3 years, which is tough.
So you can take the exam before you've done the other part.
Yeah, you just need the
Gotcha.
experience and the exam. I don't know necessarily how CPAs work, but I do know someone who recently got their CPA, but I don't know, like, how much of the studying
Hmm.
compared to the CFP or anything.
Yeah, yeah, the CPA thing. The amount of like usually tax returns that I get back that have errors makes me think that the CPA really does nothing unless you have a diligent CPA. Like if I got a CPA, which I wouldn't because it sounds miserable, um, I don't think I'd be a very good one because I'm just not. Uh, I can be detail oriented on a project basis. If I'm going to sit in front of a computer for 8 hours and be detail oriented all the time, you want someone else to do that. Uh, yeah, it just Yeah. I don't know. There's it's just obvious things like why doesn't your depreciation match any of our calculation? Why isn't that truck on the depreciation schedule? Even though we emailed you about like I don't know. Things that are not highly technical in nature still get missed from people that have the CPA designation, and people I know that don't have the CPA designation seem to catch them. So maybe there's a series of more complex problems that only CPAs are trained to handle, and I just don't ever deal with those. But I don't know, man.
I definitely think that the the professional degree or certification depends on the person who has it because
Mm-hmm.
there are, I mean, we talked about some points as to how the degree at least creates a baseline mostly. But there are people who probably have the professional degree that then have stopped caring. So,
Right? Yeah. Yeah. Your amount of care also matters in
yeah.
everything.
Yep. Well, that's all the points that I had for but and for the audience, I would actually tend to agree with Josh. I don't think it necessarily matters that much.
When would you say somebody should versus when they shouldn't?
If you're trying to get a job, that's probably when you should. And if you're trying to do good work, that's when it depends because you can do just you can honestly learn just as much from YouTube, random online courses, and other stuff as a CFP, but you don't have the legal framework behind you. So you can't say some of the same things. However, when it comes to managing finances, like, yeah, you can learn a lot without having the CFP. And so I think there are some high quality people who do know a lot compared to people who actually have the credential, but the credential does provide a legal framework behind what you do. So it's important if you're in an industry that has a lot of compliance,
Mhm.
but for in business, an MBA versus someone who doesn't have an MBA, I really don't know that there's that much of a difference. Yeah, those are my thoughts, my 2 cents, which hopefully
I
I could
would.
turn into $1 million as with a CFP.
There you go. There you go. Lean on that CFP. I tend to agree. Like if you want to go into business for yourself, skip the MBA. Read some good books. By and large, even in a college course, you're gonna take away one or two things. Unfortunately, big ideas that you'll carry with you, and you can do the same thing with books or a good course that's not at a university. But yes, if you need to get a job and it takes the credential and you're going to make a significant more amount of money, the ROI is worth it. Go ahead and get the MBA. But other than that, I don't know.
Yep. All right. Like and subscribe on YouTube and give us a 5-star review if you enjoyed it on Spotify. Make sure you guys send us some email, jc.unscripted@gmail.com. We'd love to hear future content ideas, and that is the pod. We'll see you on the next one.